The casket was shut because my daughter-in-law insisted it had to be. The crash was unspeakable, Karina told anyone who asked, lowering her lashes until people apologized for asking. White lilies crowded the church like a blizzard that had lost its way indoors. The choir hummed something familiar. I stood in a black dress I hadn't worn since my sister's memorial and tried to fix my eyes on the cross on the stained glass, on anything that wasn't a long polished box at the front of the aisle. People came past me in a gentle procession, fingers brushing my elbow, murmuring how Liam had been light laughter. Promise the sort of words you say when the person you love is no longer there to prove them. I nodded and said thank you and meant none of it, because nothing anyone said could make sense of the fact that I was being asked to mourn a face I was not allowed to see. I am Eleanor Hart, 67, retired after 35 years of teaching history to teenagers who didn't know yet that their own choices would be part of someone else's syllabus. I raised Liam alone after his father left when our son was 7. We learned the rhythm of 2 late dinner school projects Saturdays at the used bookshop, an old Subaru that sounded like a trumpet when it finally started. We were close, I believed. Maybe belief is a kind of blindfold you tie yourself. Liam married Karina 3 years ago. She arrived in his life like a shiny brochure efficient composed always with a plan. There were small alarms I pretended not to hear. She corrected Liam mid-sentence. She steered conversations back to herself with the gentlest pressure. She kept lists on a chalkboard wall and underlined his name more than once. She's ambitious, I told myself, as if ambition were a synonym for love. 2 weeks before this service, Liam called me with the kind of excitement he reserved for snow days and new guitars. Mom, Karina, and I found an amazing opportunity, small developments near Austin. We might have to rent there for a while. The way he said we was buoyant like a raft he wanted me to climb onto. Be careful, I told him, which is what mothers say when they can't be useful. He laughed and told me not to worry. The numbers were sound, the returns clear. Karina had run scenarios 10 different ways. A week later, my phone rang at 1:12 a.m. Karina hysterical. A wreck, a fire, the words tumbling over each other. He didn't suffer, she said, and I believed her because I needed to. She took over the arrangements before I had both feet on the ground. I'll handle everything, she told me, breathless with grief and purpose. You shouldn't have to see him like that. Let me protect you from it. I said yes when everything in me wanted to claw the lid off the world and look at the truth. I told myself I was being dignified, sensible, faithful. Maybe I was being lazy. Grief can make even the suspicious feel polite. In the third hymn, my phone vibrated. That was improper. I should have turned it off. I palmed it inside my sleeve to silence whatever spammer had found me on the worst day of my life. The screen lit my wrist with a blue square I didn't recognize, and then the message appeared simple as a door you thought was locked. Mom, it's me. I'm alive. That's not my body. Everything inside me tilted. The hymn slid into static. The lilies were suddenly too sweet, the air elastic and thin. For a second, I thought I might be the one who belonged in a box. I read the sentence 3 times. The name above it was Liam H. The number was his. The thread was full of old photos he'd sent me, his new porch plants, a crooked pie, a puppy that wasn't theirs, apparently just a dog he met at a gas station and loved. It was him. I walked out of my own son's funeral. Not dramatically, no sobbing, no scene. I moved the way you move when you hear your name called in a crowd and you pretend you didn't. The foyer was empty. On the notice board, a curling flyer asked for volunteers for the autumn fair. I stared at it until my hands stopped shaking enough to type. Where are you? What is happening? The bubbles appeared immediately. Can't explain here, they're watching. Come alone. Old Whitaker Orchard tomorrow at 3:00. Don't trust Karina. The Whitaker Orchard sits 15 miles south of town, past the forgotten feed store and the lake that shrinks every summer. When Liam was 16, he thought I didn't know he took girls there at dusk to watch bats pour out of the barn like black ribbon. There are things you let your child keep as secrets because you want them to practice owning something safely. I knew the place he meant. I knew the time would drag until it arrived. I put the phone in my purse and practiced my face in the reflection of the lobby glass. Neutral, grateful, fragile enough to be believed, firm enough to repel too much pity. I went back into the nave and took my seat beside Karina, who had somehow cried for an hour without the mascara shortage I expected. She squeezed my hand. You're being so strong, Ellie, she whispered, using the nickname she knows I tolerate rather than love. Liam would be proud. I looked at her and saw nothing out of place, the hair arranged like a promise, the black dress tailored as if grief were a fitting. She had planned every inch of this day. People were saying what a help she had been. I smiled at her in a way that felt like a test I would grade later. After the service, neighbors brought me casseroles with foil lids, pressed flat by kindness. Karina coordinated deliveries, thanked people by name, ushered the pastor to me like a nurse with a chart. I signed guest books without reading the messages. I said yes to things I didn't hear. The afternoon blurred and bled into the evening, and the house filled with the soft clatter of sympathy spoons, platters, whispers. When it was finally just us, Karina stood in my kitchen and told me again that she had spared me the worst of it. "You couldn't have borne it," she said, and there was something like triumph behind the pity, a small flare I recognized too late as satisfaction. When she left, the silence felt like altitude. I carried the lilies to the porch and let the night take them. I tried to sleep and did not. Every sound became a verdict, the heater coughing a car, passing the neighbor's dog delivering a sermon to the moon. I got up twice to boil water and didn't make tea. The message on my phone glowed like a pilot light. Between midnight and 2, I made a list in my head, as if a list could make a bridge. Things I know: the casket is closed. The text is real. The orchard is a place he would choose. Karina has been sure of herself since the first second. The officiant today was someone she chose, not the pastor, who christened Liam, which she explained as scheduling, and I accepted like someone being handed a cup already poured. I thought about the call in which she told me my son had burned and could not be looked at. I thought about the way she had repeated that sentence, as if rehearing it were proof. I thought about the catch in Liam's voice when he told me he and Karina were moving towards something big. In class, when a student's thesis is wrong, they talk faster. They add adjectives as if decoration is argument. I fell asleep for half an hour and dreamed of a road with no shoulder and a sign that said, "Keep your eyes forward." At noon, I drove to the old storage unit and found the spare key Liam always forgot he'd given me. The Subaru started on the second try, as if it understood what I was asking. I chose the back roads toward Whitaker because old habits are safety rails. The more turns, the less likely you are to be followed by the kinds of problems that prefer straight lines. I told no one where I was going. I left a note on my kitchen table that said library at 2. Groceries after a lie small enough to be believed by a burglar who cared. The fields were the color of toast. The wind pushed low across them, combing what remained of last year's stalks. The orchard sits beyond a rusted cattle gate that leans like a drunk at closing time. The barn behind it has lost half its roof to storms and boys. A handmade sign on the fence still says apples in red paint that never met an apple. As I turned off the road, the gravel sounded too loud. I put the car in neutral and let it coast the last 20 yards as if silence could make me invisible. I cut the engine by the fence and listened. Nothing obvious, no second engine, no voices. A hawk hashed the sky and then forgot me. The orchard itself isn't much anymore, a scatter of trees that gave up on fruit, but keep doing the thing trees do when you don't ask them to be useful. The farmhouse is long gone, only a rectangle of foundation remains filled with stubborn weeds. The barn is the landmark, gray and grand in the way ruined things can be. On the west side, the lean-to where Liam used to keep his bike when he worked here one summer is still there, a slant of tin roof, trying to pretend it matters. I checked my phone. 2:57 p.m. The message thread with his name at the top sat open like a throat. I wanted to type, "I'm here," and didn't. He had told me to come alone, to be careful, to trust no one, and I would not ruin the only instruction he'd given me. A breeze carried the smell of dust and some animal I could not place, fox maybe, or the ghost of one. My hands, these hands that have graded thousands of essays, fixed a dozen leaky faucets, strapped a boy's skates so tight he laughed, were shaking. I pressed them flat on my skirt until they remembered themselves. The sun slid a little. The barn threw a longer shadow. Somewhere a hinge complained and was answered by a bird. The kind of quiet that feels like a question settled on everything. Then I saw movement by the lean-to, a shift not of wind but of intention. A figure stepped out from the shadow, turned to scan the tree line. Then the road, then the fence where my Subaru sat, pretending to be nobody's. The posture was what did it, the way the shoulders set. The head tilted, the left hand lifted to rub the back of the neck as if thinking were a physical act. I have known that silhouette since it was shorter than my hip. I did not call his name. Names can be traps. I opened the car door and let it close with the softest thud it could manage. Dust breathed around my shoes. The figure stilled, then angled toward me, not rushing, not waving, moving with the careful, deliberate pace of someone who knows the world is watching even when it looks empty. I stood by the fence and let him come as far as he was willing. The distance between us, 30 feet, then 20, then 10, was a geography I had not imagined crossing again in this life. Up close, the face was thinner, the hair longer, the eyes alert and rimmed with the kind of tired that doesn't sleep off. He looked like someone who had learned new rules quickly. "Mom," he said, like a test you give yourself to see if you can still pronounce the past. I didn't answer. I was counting his breaths, the tendons in his throat, the pulse at his temple. I was taking attendance. Present, present, present. Behind him, beyond the barn, the orchard kept its quiet, faithful as a congregation. The wind moved through the dead grass and laid it down again. I felt my heart do the strange double beat it has done since he was born, fear and relief holding hands like brothers who fight and then share a bed in a storm. I reached for him, and the afternoon held its breath. Up close, he smelled like metal and sweat and long grass. Liam didn't hug me at first. He scanned the fence line again, the road, the broken roof line, then let his shoulders settle a notch and stepped in. When his arms finally came around me, the pressure was hesitant, as if he feared I might vanish out of his hands. I felt the hard rectangle of a new phone in his jacket and the sharpness of bones that hadn't been there in spring. "We can't stay in the open," he said. "Back here." Behind the barn, a strip of shade pulled under the lean-to. He'd parked a beat-up pickup there, not ours, some pawnshop color between brown and green with a different county's plates. He opened the passenger door and motioned me inside. The seat smelled of dust and citrus cleaner. Through the windshield, I could see the orchard's dead rows like staves on unread music. "Talk," I said. My voice sounded like chalk on slate. He ran both hands over his face and left them there, fingers pressing his eyes as if he could push back what he'd seen. "Karina isn't who you think," he said, and then corrected himself. "Who I wanted her to be." I waited. Silence properly used is a lever. "She married me for access," he said. "Not to the little money I have, to something she was sure you didn't understand you owned." The word owned lodged in my throat. What exactly? "Do you remember Aunt May's parcel near Farmington? The one Uncle Finn bought for hunting in the 70s? I nodded. 40-odd acres of sage and scrub that had been a family joke for years. We paid the taxes the way you keep an old photograph, out of habit, not utility. Karina had it quietly surveyed last fall, he said. Not for gas, for lithium brine. There's an aquifer running under part of it, and a junior geologist she knows says the concentration could be commercial. She had me sign non-disclosure forms I thought were for a real estate co-working thing. They were for mineral review. I pictured Karina's chalkboard wall with its tidy columns. Tasks calls Liam. I remembered the way she'd written in fine, efficient capitals, the way she'd wiped the board with a cloth that left no streak. She put a team together, Liam went on. Not lawyers exactly, fixers. A guy named Sloan, an accountant who doesn't ask where money slept before it woke up a paralegal with a gift for signatures. They built a path to the land that didn't look like a path. She brought you papers in February, remember insurance updates, she said. Beneficiary reviews. You were moving names around, she said, because at your age. I saw the pen in my hand again. The sweet smell of the candle on my kitchen table, the way she'd stacked the pages so each signature line bloomed under my wrist without effort. My name. The notary stamp from a woman I never met. Polite, tidy crime. She forged the rest, Liam said. Made it look like you transferred the parcel into my name as part of a simplified estate plan. Then she had me sign other papers if anything happened to me, control flow to my spouse. It all works if I'm dead. He stared past me at the gray slope of barn. I overheard her on a call 2 weeks ago. She said, we'll need a clean fire, nothing that leaves a question. The closed casket will play to her favor. Her favor, Mom, meaning you. A tremor moved through the truck, not from the engine, but from the way I held my jaw. How did you get out? I asked. I didn't sleep at home that night, he said. I took cash in a bag and left my phone on the kitchen counter like an offering. I called Karina from a motel landline the next morning and told her I was going to look at a property alone. Then I drove the opposite direction and found a guy in a junkyard who sells cars for cash. I thought I'd gotten clean. He laughed once without humor. Turns out when your wife wants to know where you are, she can know. They'd put a tracker under the wheel months ago. I found it last night and threw it in the river. Before that, they had a breadcrumb trail. The funeral text in my pocket seemed to grow heavier. Why the casket, I asked. They expected to stage proof, he said. Sloane's people were arranging a wreck, a stolen body, something to stand in. I beat them to the part where I disappeared, and Karina improvised. She keeps saying the fire made it impossible. She's good at making impossible sound compassionate. My hand went to my throat, the message you sent at the church. I used a prepaid, he said. I didn't want to, but the way she handled the service, who she invited, who she didn't. Mom, it was theater. I needed you out from under her eye long enough to tell you not to sign anything. Something small inside me unclenched and something larger hardened. You're coming with me, I said. Right now. He shook his head. If they see me with you, they'll think they can squeeze you to get me. You were safer when I was dead. Safer is not the words I'd use. My voice tried to break and failed. What do they want from me specifically? A power of attorney on the parcel, he said. Clean title transfer into a holding entity Karina controls. She told me last week she'd handle the hard conversations with your mother. That's how she put it. He blinked hard. She has binders, Mom. Tabs. She's been building this machine since before we married. I listened to the wind skitter in the tin above us like mice. If I refuse, they escalate, he said. Sloan doesn't mind bruises, he minds delays. I raised you, I said. Don't explain bruises to me. He flinched not at my tone, but at something behind it, maybe the way it sounded like the version of me who used to stand between him and boys bigger than him at the rink. I can't fix what I broke, he said. I took money I shouldn't have from people who don't have contracts, only expectations. She pushed, and I wanted to be the kind of man who could say yes. How much, I asked. He looked away. Enough that if I say the number out loud here, it will echo in this barn for a year. Try me, I said. 2.5, he said. Plus the flavor of interest you pay with your kneecaps. I let the number settle like dust. The orchard made the sound orchards make when there's nothing to pick. You'll go to ground, I said and held his eyes. I'll put on the black dress again and be exactly the widow they miscounted. He gripped the steering wheel as if we were already moving. Be careful. I stepped back into the light and did not promise. Karina called that night just before sunset, as if grief came with office hours. Eleanor, she said, professional. I know this is terrible timing, but we need to meet. There are forms regarding Liam's estate and some of your paperwork intersects. Tonight, I asked. The sooner we start, the easier the taxes. She had a gift for coding compulsion and courtesy. After 7, I said, I have casseroles to redistribute. When I arrived at their townhouse, her porch light came on before my foot hit the top step. Inside, she had laid everything out on the dining table, neat stacks, color-coded tabs, a legal pad for my questions, a capped pen parallel to the paper like a promise of painless consent. She wore no jewelry except her wedding band and an expression arranged to say, I'm trying, can you try too? This is awful for you, she said, guiding me to a chair. I'm trying to shoulder the administrivia so you can grieve. The word administrivia made me want to put my fist through drywall. I picked up the first stack. The letterhead was a firm I didn't know. The language was precise and soothing, facilitation, continuity, de minimis. The words power of attorney appeared on page 4, not as a heading, but as a phrase nested in a sentence about temporary authority for limited acts with respect to minerals. The parcel description matched Aunt May's land. I thought that parcel was worthless, I said, letting genuine confusion color the edges of my voice. Karina nodded sympathetically. Only in a resale sense, she said. It complicates liability. Better to put it into a trust so you're insulated. I had counsel draft a simple vehicle. A simple vehicle. I turned a page and set my reading glasses on the table, not on the folded napkin she'd provided, but on the laminated wood where they clicked and made her flinch. Water, I asked. Of course. She rose and poured from a glass pitcher with lemon slices floating like smiles. When she set the glass by my hand, I managed to nudge it just enough that it rocked and tipped. Cold water rushed over the paperwork, darkening the first page into a blooming map and ran off the table into my lap. Oh, I stood flustering myself on purpose. I'm so sorry. It's fine, she said too quickly. Eyes darting to the smudging ink, she fetched towels with efficient hands and resentment behind them. While she blotted, I set my phone on the chair and thumbed the camera without looking. 1, 2, 3 slow exposures that caught the parcel number, the LLC, name, the POA clause that would have erased me. When the table was dry enough to pass for dry, she produced fresh copies from a folder, as if she had rehearsed for exactly this mishap. No harm done, she said, but it sounded like a wish. I should have someone review these, I said. My old neighbor's nephew does wills. Karina's mouth softened at the edges and then tightened again. Of course, she said. Although with deadlines. County filings, she said. It's best not to let things linger. I've taught teenagers for 3 decades, I said mildly. Everything lingers. She folded her hands. Eleanor, she said, lowering her voice into a bandaged tone, Liam wanted things to be simple for you. He was very clear about that. He specifically asked me to help so you wouldn't have to carry the ugly parts. She looked at the papers, not at me. Let me carry this. Sign these and you won't get phone calls about terms you don't have time to learn. I let the quiet work a second longer, then picked up the pen. I uncapped it and set it down. No, I said. Something slid out of her eyes, quick as a fish. No, I don't sign things I haven't read, I said. Not anymore. She tilted her head the way a doctor does when the test comes back unexpected. You're upset, she said. We can try again tomorrow. Let's, I said. On the porch, she hugged me with theatrical care as if I were porcelain she was paid to deliver unbroken. You're doing so well, she murmured. He would be touched. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel and the images of her paperwork sitting in my pocket damp around the edges. They were already inside. I knew before I turned the lamp on because the air had a different shape. The smell came first, some clone built to be remembered and a thread of tobacco under it. When the light came up, 3 men were composed in my living room, the way furniture composes itself as if it has always been there. The one in the middle sat in my late husband's chair, 50-ish hair clipped close enough to count face, designed to be forgotten. He smiled the way someone smiles when they prefer to get through this without blood. Mrs. Hart, he said pleasantly. Sloan. I did not offer mine. Get out, I said. He held up a hand. We're here as a courtesy. Your courtesy smells like my chair, I said, and heard Liam in my cadence. The younger one on the right, 30 maybe, with eyes that had been sanded, tilted his phone to show me a photo. Grainy telephoto, the edge of a barn, the back of a man inside a greenish truck. Time-stamped that afternoon. Your boy's not a ghost, he said softly. I looked. I kept looking until the image became shapes instead of a person. You have the wrong man, I said. Sloane's smile thinned. What we have, he said, is a situation that can resolve cleanly. Paper can be very merciful, Mrs. Hart. You sign, we forget the math. What math? 2.5 and friends, he said. Your son borrowed ambition from the wrong ledger. You'll have to speak up, I said. My conscience has a ringing in it. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Transfer the parcel, he said. We have everything ready. Karina will bring you what you need. Tomorrow night latest. After that, we stopped being courteous. I looked at the clock. It read 8:42, but time had been wrong all day. I didn't trust it. And if I don't, I asked. People get found, the quiet one said. He had not spoken until then. His voice was the sound of a door closing. Sloane stood smoothing his jacket as if he wanted to show me he was tidy, even in menace. You're a practical woman, he said. Be practical now. They filed past me and let themselves out. The door shut like a period. I locked it and then locked it again and then put the chain on because ritual makes a kind of sense when nothing else does. The silence that followed had weight. I crossed the room and righted the things they had touched, not because they were crooked, but because I was. The table lamp cast a soft oval over the photos on the mantel. In one, Liam was 5, his hair sticking out from under a knit cap, his mouth full of snow he wasn't supposed to eat. In another, he was 27 and squinting at sunlight on water the day he told me he'd met a woman who made him feel like he'd been late to his life and had finally arrived. I set the frame straight anyway, though they were already straight. On the counter, the lilies from the church had begun to brown at the edges. I carried them to the sink and let the water run until the vase overflowed, flood against white petals and unhelpful baptism. The house settled around me, the old heater's breath, the refrigerator's sermon, the clock's soft insistence. Tomorrow night, latest, the man had said. I dried my hands on a towel. The skin on my palms felt new and thin and unafraid. The papers in my pocket clicked faintly when I moved. The phone on the table lit and went dark. I stood in the middle of my own living room and listened to the echo of my name in a stranger's mouth. Mrs. Hart, practical woman, and let it fall away until only the room remained, and the deadline and the address on a parcel I had once thought was nothing at all. I slept in the kitchen if closing your eyes with your coat on counts. At dawn, the lilies had turned the color of nicotine. I threw them out, washed the vase, and called the only person I trusted with trouble that wore a tie. Ava Morales, she answered on the second ring, the city still in her voice. She had been Ava Diaz in my homeroom once, sharp as flint, a girl who turned detention into debate practice. Now her firm occupied the 4th floor of a building with elevators that didn't apologize. Ava, it's Eleanor Hart. A beat, then warmth. Mrs. Hart, I still have your red pen scars on my ego. Tell me where you are. Driving, I said and did. By 9, I was in a glass-walled conference room, high enough that the town looked manageable. Ava wore a navy suit and the expression of a person who had slept recently on purpose. I laid out what I had: the photos of Karina's paperwork, the parcel number for Aunt May's land near Farmington, the numbers Liam had whispered in the barn, the visit from men who called violence courtesy. Ava didn't interrupt. She circled items on a legal pad the way I used to circle topic sentences. The parcel has mineral history, she said, tapping her screen. You're not wrong about lithium brine. There are early-stage filings in that basin. Nothing certain, but enough to make a novice ambitious and a professional careful. She is not a novice, I said. No, Ava agreed. She's an organizer. She built scaffolding around a fact and hoped you wouldn't notice the climbing. She studied the photo where the words power of attorney bloomed on page 4. They're angling for control without the optics of a sale. If you sign this, the next thing that happens is a quiet assignment to an LLC you do not own, and then a series of encumbrances that make you a ghost. I said no, I told her. Good, Ava said, as if we were discussing seatbelts. She turned the pad to a clean page. You're going to put something in front of them that looks easier than what they brought. It will be cleaner, faster, more respectable. They will prefer it because it flatters their self-image, and it will not do what they think. I watched her hands move. What does it do? It routes the parcel into a trust you name, she said, with a trustee they think they control. It includes routine representations, no fraud, no undue influence, no hidden consideration that people sign without tasting the words. It has a clause requiring the trustee to notify appropriate regulators of any irregularities discovered in prior transfers under penalty of perjury, and there will be side letters, escrow instructions that duplicate the executed documents to a secure recipient the moment the trustee accepts. Secure recipient, I repeated. Someone who reads federal statutes for breakfast, she said, and someone local who knows how to knock on doors without getting lost. I'm not promising outcomes, Eleanor. I'm making weight where you need leverage. Karina isn't cautious, I said, but Sloan is. Then we help Sloan believe this is his idea, Ava said, and smiled the small smile of a strategist who can already see the board. We'll seed urgency some plausible nonsense about quarterly filings on mineral interests. He won't be able to reach counsel quickly enough to soothe his anxiety. He'll choose speed and control. She drafted. I watched the city rearrange itself behind her shoulder as light shifted across windows. When she finished the stack, she slid to me, looked like every expensive solution I've ever been told to trust. The letterhead was her firm's. The font had been chosen by someone who understands how confidence feels. She walked me through the teeth behind the smile, the trust instrument with its honeyed recitals, the trustee acceptance with its stiff, ordinary oaths, the escrow instruction that would send clean copies where paper cannot be shredded. You'll need signatures in public, she said, and witnesses who have names. I know a place where names eat pie, I said. Haven Diner, she said without asking, and I remembered that she grew up here whether or not the city knew it. On my way out, she stopped me. I still owe you for letting me rewrite my college essay, she said. This pays against that. Don't be sentimental, I told her, and we both laughed for a second, like teacher and student again, the way the past forgives us long enough to breathe. I texted Karina, can we meet tonight somewhere public? Church ladies won't stop bringing casseroles, and I can't think around aluminum. She replied inside a minute, Haven at 7. I'll bring Sloan. I arrived 30 minutes early and chose the booth in the back with a view of the floor and the door. Sheriff Nora Pike ate there on Tuesdays, chicken fried in front of her, and a stack of reports to her right. Tuesday, the day had done what I needed. She sat 3 booths up, half of her attention on coleslaw, half on the shape of people entering. I stood to refill my coffee and paused by her table as if I'd forgotten a name. Sheriff, I said softly, I have signatures to show you in about 20 minutes. Please don't look back at me now. She didn't. How's your pie? She asked the air. Shame if it cooled. Terrible pie, I said, and returned to my seat with my cup warmer than my spine. Karina came on the dot, black dress traded for a suit that meant business hair pulled back like a promise. Sloan walked half a step behind eyes working the room until they passed over the sheriff and did not stop. He sat down first without being invited to the kind of man who measures ownership by instinct. You asked for public, Karina said as if she were granting a favor. It keeps me from knocking things over, I said. I placed Ava's stack on the table and pushed it toward them. These accomplish what you said you wanted, but faster. My lawyer prefers clean vehicles. Sloan touched the first page as if checking for heat. Your lawyer, Ava Morales, I said. You'll find she's not a hobbyist. He scanned the headings with a practiced boredom that didn't quite fit his shoulders. Karina read more slowly, lips moving on the representations. Why the trust, she asked. Insulates me, I said. Insulates you. Everybody's insulated. America loves insulation. Quarterly mineral filings I added before Sloan could ask for time. Ava says we're inside a window that closes at midnight. If documents are lodged tomorrow, we'll get a different set of eyes and a different timeline. I don't pretend to understand the bureaucracy, but I understand waiting. I said it like a person repeating jargon I don't like. Sloan's jaw moved once as if he were testing a tooth. He pulled out his phone and then set it down. After 8, he could call and no one he paid would answer. No one would take responsibility for telling him not to sign something that looked this good. Karina tapped a clause with her nail. Notification of irregularities. That's boilerplate, I said. My neighbor's kid signed it for a storage unit. It's not boilerplate, Sloan said without looking at me. He flipped to the trustee acceptance. Representations and warranties, penalties of perjury, acceptance triggers. Who receives the duplicates? The trust protector, I said. Think of it as a referee. If anyone misbehaves, the protector has the power to replace a bad trustee with a good one. Karina inhaled carefully the way a diver tests water. And we are... Trustee. You are, I said. You wanted control. She looked at Sloan. Something passed between them like a coin, not visible, certainly negotiable. The waitress set down coffee and a plate of rolls that steamed like promises. I buttered one. I had no intention of eating the knife, making a sound against the bread that reminded me of skates on ice. Sloan turned a page and found the escrow letter. Delivery upon acceptance, he read. To a post office box in Santa Fe. Ava's co-counsel, I said, and let my face carry the right amount of tedium. She likes redundancy. Her office floods a file room once a year. She told me that as if it were charming. Karina's pen hovered. We signed, she said, not a question. I uncapped mine and handed it over. Sloan rotated the stack so the signature lines faced them like runways. He signed with a heavy practiced hand. Karina's signature was exact as if it had studied itself. When they were finished, I slid the papers back into the envelope and closed the clasp. The sound was unsatisfying and perfect. I need the originals, Sloan said, reaching. They're going with me, I said. I lifted my water, set it down exactly where a ring would mark the laminate, and said, "I'll courier a full set to the recorder first thing." He smiled in a way that counted my bones. "We'll take them now, Ms. Hart." "Mrs." I said, and kept my hand on the envelope. Karina touched Sloane's sleeve. "Let her courier," she said lightly. "Appearances matter." He leaned back. "Where should we have our team meet you?" he asked, as if that concession were a gift he might take back. I looked at the clock above the counter. 8:17. I let the silence work until I could see how badly he wanted the answer. "Wherever your team processes things," I said. "I assume you know a desk with a stamp." "Gowan Industrial," he said finally. "Building 12, the south roll-up. Bring the envelope, 9:30. Karina slid from the booth, smoothing her jacket. "Thank you for being reasonable," she said. "Grief makes people unpredictable." "I'm very predictable," I said. "I read before I sign." They left with the peculiar grace of people who think the room approves of them. The bell over the door clanged twice, first for each of them, then for the cold that followed. I stood, picked up the envelope, and walked to Sheriff Pike's booth with a coffee cup in my hand like a passport. She didn't look surprised to see me. I set a single sheet from the duplicates on the edge of her plate and said quietly, "This is signed." "There's an address." Her fork paused an inch above gravy. "How long?" she asked. 9:30, I said. "South roll-up." She folded the paper once and slid it under her reports without losing track of her coleslaw. "Finish your coffee," she said in the tone teachers use when they have already decided the next period's seating chart. Back at my booth, the coffee had cooled, but my hands had not. The waitress asked if I wanted dessert. I said I had eaten more than enough sweetness for one day. The napkin under my cup had taken the imprint of a line from the Trust's title page. For a long second, I stared at the ghost words, "Declaration of," and pressed my thumb into the paper until the letters faded. On the counter, a red neon sign hummed the word "open," as if it didn't know any others. The parking lot outside gathered cars into its shallow bowl of light. I slipped the envelope into my bag, stood, and left a tip that tried to apologize for secrets spoken over meatloaf. Karina and Sloane were nowhere on the street. The night held steady above Maine, grainy with winter and the undertone of snow that doesn't arrive. I stepped into it and felt the address in my pocket like a small hard stone. The door of the diner swung shut behind me, the bell giving one soft final note that almost sounded like relief. Main Street held its breath as I stepped into the cold. The diner's bell clicked shut behind me, and the town became a map courthouse to the left, feed store dark, the neon open humming as if it were a prayer that had forgotten its words. I drove with the envelope on the passenger seat, its edge resting against the seatbelt like a rib. Gowan Industrial sat outside the river curve where warehouses came to rust, and weather did the rest. I parked on a rise where the chain link dipped and the sodium lights pooled in shallow circles. From up there, Building 12 was a hulk with a scar of a loading dock and the south roll-up stacked like a closed eyelid. My phone pulsed once. A message from Ava Copies triggered. "Protector notified. I'm looping a federal contact who owes me coffee." A second ping, "Don't carry the originals into a room you can't walk out of." I slid the envelope under the seat and left only a thin sheaf of decoys in my bag, blank paper with the shape of importance. Headlights stitched the far road and went out. Another car followed slow enough to count. An unmarked sedan slid into the far corner behind a stack of empty pallets. Sheriff Pike's silhouette moved past the windshield. She didn't look toward me. Two more dark shapes settled near the loading bays. The air changed quieter, heavier the way a gym feels when you step into a match that has already been judged by the crowd. At 9:31, a black SUV nosed up to 12 and idled. Sloane stepped out first, jacket open, hand flat on his pocket as if it were a tame animal. Karina came around the back, hair-tight eyes already calculating the room she had not yet entered. Two men I didn't know lifted the roll-up with a rattle, and the dark inside accepted them. My hands found the edge of the steering wheel and stayed there. The heater coughed. I turned it off and let the cold establish its rules. Through the fence wires, the scene lay flat, like something printed on glossy stock. A minute later, another car arrived, the younger man who'd shown me the grainy photo in my living room, plus a woman in boots who moved like she owned doors. They went in. The roll-up settled. The weight was a length of elastic. I watched a rectangle of light cut itself under the door and shiver when footsteps crossed it. Somewhere behind the buildings, a train exhaled, and then took back its air. Blue strobes blinked once, then held. The floodlights teethed on. A voice, amplified, dispassionate, announced the thing you never think you'll hear in a place you've passed 100 times. "This is law enforcement. The building is surrounded. Exit the south door with hands visible." Silence came next, a bright, hard kind. Then a clatter, a metal thing falling over, and the door lifted as if it had decided to behave. Sloane emerged, blinking hands up his mouth, already forming arguments. Karina followed, pale in the glare, fingers spread the way you do when you want to show the world you have nothing left to hide. The younger man came third, jaw set, eyes flat. The woman in boots lashed chin up as if the lights owed her an apology. They were separated and turned and pressed into the choreography of zip ties and quiet commands. The fourth, unmarked, rolled forward. 2 agents moved to the dock and disappeared inside, returning with boxes and a printer that looked as if it had been asked to make sins official. On the far side of the lot, someone shouted once. The sound hit concrete and broke apart into something that wasn't language. I didn't get out of my car. I sat and watched the night take shape around consequences. Sheriff Pike walked to the edge of the floodlight and made a call. My phone rang a second later. "Mrs. Hart," she said. Her voice sounded the way a room sounds after the bell rings and everyone leaves, used orderly. "We have 6 in custody. Paper drives notaries. That'll be enough to keep them where paper can find them again." "Good," I said. The word felt smaller than it needed to be. "You still sitting high?" she asked. "Yes. Stay there. We'll want statements and your envelope, not tonight." A pause. "You did steadier work than most people do with badges. I'm just saying it out loud so it's on the air." The line clicked soft. In the flood's whitewash, Karina turned her head as if searching for a camera that would understand her side of things. For an instant, she looked exactly like herself. No angles, no calibration, just a woman whose math had stopped balancing. Sloan spoke to no one, then to everyone, his hands shaping explanations in the air, as if he could sign language his way back inside the door that had shut. I drove home by the long route. The envelope stayed under the seat, humming its small paper hum. At the red light by the mill pond, I caught my own face in the rear view, old or unfamiliar in its steadiness, and looked away first. The house let me in like a place that remembered my key. On the table, the lamp drew a circle that had been waiting all day. Liam was on the porch steps when I opened the door, coat zipped to his throat, breath ghosting. He stood uncertain whether to be a son or a man with news. "Inside," I said, and he came. In the kitchen, he hovered at the edge of the light. The lines under his eyes were shallows and deeper water both. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and kept his hands at his sides, as if touch might make him forget the rules he'd set for himself. "I'm fine," I said. "They are not." He inhaled once long, like someone coming out from underwater. "Karina." "Alive," I said. "In custody, with others." He nodded, because there aren't words for the version of relief that arrives wearing handcuffs on strangers. He sat where he used to sit when he was 8 and too wound up to eat, and the chair made the same complaint it made 20 years ago. On the counter, the kettle clicked and let heat whisper from the spout, the emphatic language of water deciding to be useful. "I kept thinking I'd ruined you," he said without looking up. "All of it. The house. Your name. That parcel I never thought about, and she knew like a bank account." "You didn't ruin me," I said. I set mugs on the table, put a spoon beside his like a vote of confidence. "You gave me a job that required doing." He laughed once, brief and unkind to himself. "You always wanted homework." "I wanted the truth written in the margins," I said, and slid the steam toward him. He wrapped his hands around the mug the way a person does when warmth is a decision as much as a sensation. We didn't talk about plans. We spoke the facts we could hold without tipping. He told me where he'd slept the last few nights, a motel that used to be a place travelers stayed on purpose, a friend's garage, the orchard, in the truck because the barn felt too much like a stage. I told him who had been in our living room, how the quiet one's voice sounded, that names lose their power when you refuse to wear them. Near midnight, my phone pinged again. "Ava, search warrants executed. Your signatures delivered to my co-counsel's box as expected. State and federal will be busy. Sleep if you can." A second message followed, a photo of a file cart stacked with binders, each spine labeled with someone else's misery. One label was a woman's name I knew from church. Another was a town 2 states over. I put the phone face down. The clock in the hallway ticked without apology. Liam watched the window as if the dark might introduce him to news before the phone did. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked, and then seemed to think better of the question as if it presumed an answer I might not want to give. "Yes," I said. He unfolded onto the sofa the way tall men do when they have to negotiate with furniture. I put a blanket over him, one that had belonged to his grandfather, the fibers loose from the years and the washing. In the doorway, I stood long enough to remember him at 4, with a fever at 12, with a split lip at 19, asleep over a textbook he didn't need to pass. Then I turned out the lamp and let the house choose its own darkness. Morning came with a clean, thin light. The yard was reamed with frost that would pretend to be snow until noon. I made coffee, and the smell moved through the rooms like something you trust. The paper thumped the porch. The headline named arrests at the industrial park. A smaller paragraph described a coordinated investigation into interstate property and mineral fraud. No names yet. There would be names. There. By midday, the phone learned new habits. Polite calls with badge numbers. A calm woman from a prosecutor's office who asked if I preferred afternoon or morning for a statement. A recorded line that asked whether I needed victim services, and then reminded me to press 2 if I spoke Spanish. Ava rang to say a federal docket would pick up some counts because mail and wire had crossed state lines often enough to teach geography to a jury. At 4, an officer returned items taken from my home when the men made themselves comfortable. Each thing bagged and labeled as if my lamp and my books had been important witnesses. At 5, I found the tracker Liam had pried from the truck lying on the kitchen counter in a Ziploc, a coin with a red eye. I set it in a drawer and closed the drawer like a story you acknowledge and then shelve. Toward evening, quiet settled the way flour does if you leave the bag open, soft everywhere, a little messy, until you decide not to clean it up yet. Liam woke and came to the doorway, hair at uncertain angles, the blanket folded over his arm like contrition. We made sandwiches with what the church ladies had refused to stop bringing. He ate standing up and then sat and finished and didn't notice the difference. When the light went, it went quickly. I stepped onto the porch and let cold sting my face. Across the street, a neighbor scraped a windshield. Somewhere a dog told the dark it had opinions. Behind me in the kitchen, a mug clinked against the sink once. Inside the house, the envelope lay on the table at last. No longer under a seat or beside a threat, only paper again, ordinary heavy as it needed to be. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.